Welcome! Okay, today we are diving into a really fascinating explainer. We're going to meticulously break down a widely debated analysis about something that affects literally everyone's wallet, domestic petrol pricing. It's a massive paradox, and we're going to map the whole thing out clearly and, most importantly, impartially. Let's jump right in.
So, here is the central riddle our source presents, and honestly, it's a bit of a head-scratcher. If the raw materials used to make a product suddenly get way cheaper, why on earth is the final product getting more expensive for you and me? I mean, it totally defies basic supply and demand logic, right? This seemingly inverse relationship between global crude oil costs and local retail petrol costs is the core mystery we're unraveling today. To make sense of the source's claims step by step, we've structured this explainer into three simple sections. Number 1, crude versus retail prices. Number 2, a timeline of excise duties. And number 3, the ethanol blending factor. Let's kick things off at Section 1, crude versus retail prices. This establishes the foundational paradox that the entire analysis hinges on. Our source points out a pretty stark contradiction. Think back to 2014. Global crude oil was sitting at $105 per barrel. For consumers at the pump, that translated to 72 rupees per liter. Now, fast forward to the current market highlighted in the source. The raw material has actually dropped down to $96 per barrel. But the retail price of petrol, it's crossed 100 rupees, hitting 112 in Delhi and a whopping 111 rupees in Mumbai. So the raw material is objectively cheaper today than in 2014, yet the retail product costs significantly more. Make it make sense.
Just to ground this frustration, we have to remember what crude oil actually is. It's the unrefined global raw material, the absolute fundamental ingredient for retail petrol. When the price of this baseline ingredient drops, we, as consumers, naturally expect a discount. So when that discount never materializes, well, that inverse relationship becomes glaringly obvious. All right, let's move to Section 2. Timeline of excise duties. The source argues that to really understand this massive price gap, we have to look straight at historical government taxation.
The source maps this argument out across 4 pivotal years. In 2014, we see an initial excise duty bump as global prices fell. Then, 2020 hits, the COVID crash happens, and there's a massive domestic tax hike. Fast forward to 2022, the Russia-Ukraine war triggers another hike at the pump. And finally, 2023. Crude drops again, but retail remains stubbornly high. Let's actually zoom in on some of this data. Look at the 2020 COVID pandemic. Global crude oil prices absolutely crashed by an incredible 69%. The bottom literally fell out of the global market. In a standard scenario, consumers should have seen a massive immediate discount right along with that crash. And that brings us to this wild claim from the source. They assert that if subsequent tax hikes hadn't been implemented during that global crash, we could have seen petrol selling for as little as 40 rupees a liter. Just imagine that for a second, filling up your tank at 40 rupees a liter. It's a striking hypothetical, but the source uses it to highlight the sheer massive impact of government taxation policies on your daily expenses. Now, what's really interesting here is the stark contrast in domestic excise duty over time. Back in 2014, the excise duty was 9.48 rupees per liter. But by May 2020, right during that exact period when raw material costs were plummeting, domestic excise duty was drastically jacked up to 32 rupees per liter. The source basically argues that the government actively absorbed those global savings by raising taxes.
So the crucial point is this asymmetric government response. In 2022, when the Russia-Ukraine war caused crude prices to spike, retail prices were quickly bumped up by 5.6 rupees per liter. The burden was immediately passed to the consumer. But in 2023, when crude dropped again, those retail prices stayed high. The core argument here is that the financial burden falls squarely on the public during a global crisis, but the benefits of global price drops, those are entirely withheld.
Which brings us to our third and final section. The ethanol blending factor. Here, the source introduces a totally unexpected twist about the actual physical composition of the fuel itself. This is a detail a lot of everyday consumers probably don't know. The fuel you buy at the pump is not actually pure petrol. According to the source, it's a blend, 80% pure petrol and 20% ethanol. So when you're at the pump, you're not just buying petrol, you're buying a mixture. And here's why that blend is economically super important. The wholesale cost of ethanol is around 60 to 65 rupees per liter, while pure petrol is about 20% more expensive. Logically, if you're blending a significantly cheaper liquid into a full fifth of the volume, that should lower the final retail price for consumers, right? Well, the source claims that this cost benefit, just like the dropped crude prices, is simply not reaching the public. This leads to a very pointed, politically charged conclusion from the creator of the source. They explicitly claim that the biggest beneficiaries of this ethanol blending are ministers sitting in the government and their children, even going so far as to label it an ethanol scam. Now, as your explainer, it's our job to neutrally report the claims being made in our source material, and they are explicitly arguing that the margins saved from using cheaper ethanol are being pocketed by those in power rather than saving you money at the pump.
So we arrive at a fundamental, provocative thought to wrap up our whole analysis today. When global raw materials crash, who truly absorbs the margins in the final retail price? Is it the consumer at the pump, the government through taxation, or other beneficiaries in the supply chain? It's a massively complex dynamic of global economics versus domestic policy. I hope this explainer gave you a clearer understanding of commodity pricing and honestly, maybe left you eager to dig into this paradox even more on your own. Thanks so much for joining us.